Welcome to the CompTIA A 220-1001, Module 1. Today's lesson is Lesson 1.9, Monitoring. Monitoring hardware in the BIOS. I am your instructor, Bill Price. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, for today's lesson, let's go over our lesson objectives. First, we're going to talk about temperature monitoring, the heat inside the case and monitoring those temperatures. Next, we're going to talk about fan speeds and what we can do with fan speeds and controlling that or monitoring that. We're going to talk about then intrusion detection and notification. Finally, we're going to come up to voltage and the voltage in your system and monitoring that. And our last item that we're going to cover in this lesson would be the clock and the bus speeds. So let's go ahead and get started. Temperature monitoring. We can't stress enough that it's very, very important that you keep track of the temperatures inside of your computer. It's very, very important. The reason why it's important is because of potential damage to your components, the components on the board or other devices like the CPU, graphic video cards, and other devices that's mounted or around in the system unit itself. Symptoms of high temperature in your computer. You experience sudden shutdowns, constant reboots or restarts, or your system may not boot at all. Or you may boot, but you may see alarms or errors in BIOS. And we covered that earlier in another lesson. You'll see error postcodes in post. It will say, temperature alarms and so forth. All of these symptoms are telling you that your computer is running too hot and something needs to be done as soon as possible. So monitoring the temperature on the motherboard, a lot of the motherboard manufacturers have a lot of different utilities, and they pretty much all do the same thing. They monitor the heat that's on the board as well as in the system. Now, motherboards have built-in heat sensors to monitor the components, like I said, on the board and in the system. So you get the best of both worlds. You can monitor the board itself as well as the ambient temperature around the board inside of the case. Now, some models have options to reduce the CPU speed to lower the CPU temperature. If you're running heavy loads or running slightly the normal loads and the CPU is tasked very heavily, you can go into the BIOS and make adjustments to throttle that back to kind of keep the system cool. Now, the two components that generate the most heat would be the CPU and the graphic video cards. In heavy gaming systems or just heavy use or design systems, these two components work the heaviest. They carry the heavy load, so therefore they generate the most heat. Now, again, overheating systems can cause component damage, so it is imperative that you regulate your heat, watch your heat, monitor your heat, and make changes as soon as possible so you don't damage the components in your system. Now, causes of computer heating. These are some causes that we have seen. Blocked air vents. If there's not air flowing inside the system unit case, it's a lot of heat. It's not cooling the components off. Air is not circulating. So therefore, that's going to generate heat. Blocked air vents, as you may know, comes from one of many different reasons. It could be dust buildup. It could just be where the unit is positioned under the desk and there's no airflow. Those system units, computers need airflow to help keep it cool. The cooling components or fans are not working or not working at all or somewhat working. You have to make sure that those fans are running properly. Physical looking at the fans, it could be dust buildup. It could be running slow because it's failing. So you want to put your eyes on that device and make sure it's running correctly. We've also seen heat sink fan issues. The fans on the heat sink, which is on top of the CPU, could be crimped and not letting air flow from the CPU and cooling that CPU off. So again, that could be physical damage with that device. Thermal paste issues. The thermal paste between the heatsink and the CPU. It could be thin or none at all. The thermal paste help dissipate the heat from the CPU. So that's something that need to be checked as well. And also malfunctioning components can generate excessive heat in their operations. So all of these factors could generate a lot of heat for the system unit. So let's talk about fan speeds. Fan speeds, BIOS monitoring the fan speeds. Some features will vary by model. Common speeds that you may see or settings that you may see in the BIOS would be a standard, a turbo, a silent, or manual. All of these are controllable in the BIOS. And you'll see these more in the newer UEFI BIOSes versus the older legacy systems. Now here we see another version of the UEFI where you can control as far as the fan speeds here. And this is in the gigabyte motherboard. Again, check your motherboard manufacturer for details here because it will vary in the different features and components that you have available as far as monitoring those fan speeds and adjusting the fan speeds. Let's move on to intrusion detection. Since the early onset of PCs, there's always been a form of intrusion detection on the case. And the reason why this would be important is you want to know if someone is tampering with your system. You want to know if someone has went into the case and may have caused damage maliciously, or for whatever reason that case has been opened. Just like an alarm on your house or your car, you want to know if someone's inside of that. So the same thing with a intrusion detection on the PC. You want to know if that case has been opened or by unauthorized individuals. So the intrusion detection switch detects intrusion into the interior of the system unit case, and it provides an alert that the case has been opened. And this could be in the form of a postcode that pops up. And when you boot up the computer, you'll see a post error code, intrusion detection, that had been a notification or a pop-ups along those lines. And here you can see an advanced system, the UEFI, different settings for this as well. So again, it varies depending on the BIOS that you have in your system. Voltage monitoring, very, very important. Monitoring the voltage of your system, like I said, is critical. Components can fail or be damaged because of improper voltage. If it's too low a voltage, over a period of time, that can degrade the components. If it's too high a voltage, of course, we know that it may burn or zap the components. The voltage of the CPU and regulators can be monitored in the BIOS. And here you have an example of the ASUS UEFI BIOS utility and the monitoring of the voltage here. Clock and bus speeds. In some BIOS versions, you can monitor the speed of the CPU. Overclocking is what we've learned in the earlier lesson of 1.6, or running the CPU at higher speeds allows you to make adjustments or change the clock speed. You can verify that your clock speed is running according to the manufacturer details here in the BIOS. Okay. So let's review some of the items that we went over. So we talked about the temperature monitoring, and we stressed as far as how important the temperature monitoring is in your system and what can cause improper temperatures and the damage. We talked about fan speeds, and we looked at different examples of those fan speeds, either changing the fan speeds and monitoring across different BIOS utilities. We talked about the intrusion detection and notification and how that looks. We talked about voltage. Voltage is very important, making sure you monitor the voltage in your system unit system. And finally, we rounded off and finished talking about the clock and the bus speeds and monitoring there. So a lot of different monitoring features in the BIOS. The BIOS is again, it's the central brain of your computer. So there's a lot that the BIOS does and can do. So there's a lot of monitoring what that happens as well. So outside of all of that, as you're running your operating system and doing everything with your computer, again, the BIOS is critical to all of that because that's where all the hardware and everything talks to. So it monitors everything like the command center from the background. Okay, so that's all for today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed this and got a lot out of it. I know I did. So we will see you in the next lesson.